Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of the most recognizable spaces in the Roman world, and also one of the easiest to misunderstand. A Roman bath was not just a place to get clean. It was a machine for social life, public status, engineering, routine, and empire. Behind the marble floors and warm pools was a whole system of labor, fuel, architecture, and custom that helped define what it meant to live in a Roman city. And once you look closely, something as ordinary as washing begins to reveal how Rome organized daily life on an enormous scale. And before we begin, if you enjoy calm, carefully researched history told in a way that gives these worlds room to breathe, subscribing is a simple way to stay connected to future deep dives like this. A lot of regular viewers subscribe so they don't miss the next story, and it really does help thoughtful long-form history find the people who enjoy it most. To understand how Romans took baths, it helps to begin with a simple correction. Most Romans did not bathe in the way modern people usually imagine. They did not step into a private tiled room, turn a handle, and enjoy hot running water in isolation. For much of Roman history, bathing was a public experience. It was structured, repeated, social, and visible. In many towns and cities, baths were among the most important buildings in daily life, as familiar in their own way as markets, temples, or streets. People came not only to wash, but to meet clients, speak with friends, make business arrangements, exercise, rest, and take part in one of the most routine rituals of Roman urban culture. That culture did not appear all at once. Early Roman habits were simpler, and Roman bathing was shaped over time by contact with the Greek world, especially after Rome expanded into the Eastern Mediterranean. The Greeks had already developed traditions of exercise, oiling the body, and communal washing, and the Romans adapted these practices to their own society with remarkable enthusiasm. Over the centuries, what began as modest bathing arrangements developed into the vast bath complexes that later astonished visitors and still impress modern audiences in ruins at places like Rome, Pompeii, Ostia, and Bath in Roman Britain. By the height of the empire, baths had become a standard feature of city life, and emperors sponsored enormous public establishments partly because they understood how much prestige such buildings could bring. A Roman bath complex was carefully designed to guide the body through space and temperature. Not every building followed the exact same plan, but many included a sequence of familiar rooms. A visitor might enter through a courtyard or approach hall and move into an apoditorium, which served as a changing room. From there, the route often led through warm and hot chambers before ending, or sometimes beginning, with a cold plunge. The best known of these spaces were the tepidarium, a warm room, the caldarium, the hot room, and the frigidarium, the cold room. Some bathhouses also included exercise yards known as palaestri, swimming pools, steam rooms, gardens, lecture spaces, and places to sit and talk. In the largest imperial baths, the scale could be astonishing. These were not simply washrooms. They were public environments built to shape the rhythm of an afternoon. The order of bathing could vary, and Roman writers do not always describe exactly the same sequence, but the general logic is clear. Bathers usually prepared the body gradually. They might begin with exercise, perhaps throwing a ball, stretching, or engaging in light training in the courtyard. Exercise served practical and cultural purposes. It warmed the body, produced sweat, and also linked bathing to ideals of physical discipline inherited in part from the Greek gymnasium. Afterward, the bather entered the heated rooms. The tepidarium acted as a transition, allowing the body to adjust. The caldarium, by contrast, was the most intense environment, with hot air, heated floors, and often a hot bath basin. The frigidarium offered a final cold immersion that refreshed the skin and closed the sequence with a sense of sharp contrast. One of the most interesting details is that Roman bathing was not centered on soap in the modern sense. Instead, many bathers used olive oil on the skin. Oil helped loosen dirt and sweat, and after time in the warm rooms, this mixture could be scraped away with a curved metal tool called a strigil. This method appears strange to modern habits, but in the Roman world it was entirely normal. The body was oiled, heated, sweated, and then scraped clean. Servants might assist wealthy bathers, especially in elite settings, while ordinary visitors managed more of the process themselves. The result was less about a foamy wash and more about treatment of the skin through heat, oil, friction, and water. The famous Roman concern for engineering was essential to this entire experience. A bathhouse required a constant and carefully controlled supply of water, along with a reliable way to heat rooms on a large scale. In many cities, aqueducts fed public baths, delivering enormous quantities of water across long distances with a precision that remains one of the most admired achievements of Roman infrastructure. But water alone was not enough. The true heart of the heated bath complex was the hypocaust system, an underfloor heating method that helped make Roman baths one of the technological wonders of the ancient world. In a hypocaust, a furnace heated air that circulated beneath raised floors supported on small pillars. This hot air could also pass through hollow spaces in the walls, warming the rooms from below and around the sides. The caldarium, being the hottest room, was placed nearest the furnace, while the tepidarium sat farther away at a gentler temperature. The design was elegant, but it depended on constant labor. Fires had to be maintained, fuel had to be delivered, ash had to be cleared, and the system had to be supervised. What looked effortless to the visitor rested on hidden work carried out by attendants, laborers, and enslaved people. As with so much in Roman life, convenience at the surface was supported by discipline and hierarchy beneath it. The baths were also deeply social places. Roman authors described them as busy, noisy, and full of movement. This is important because modern images sometimes present Roman bathing as serene and almost sacred, a sequence of silent pools in polished stone. In reality, many bathhouses were lively public spaces. People talked, laughed, negotiated, argued, exercised, and observed one another. Clients might meet patrons there. Friends arranged conversations there. Philosophers, teachers, or readers could be found nearby in some larger complexes. Vendors and attendants moved through the space. The baths allowed different layers of society to appear together in a semi-public setting, though not always on equal terms. A senator and a tradesman might use the same institution, but their experience within it could still be very different. Access mattered. Many baths charged only a small fee, making them affordable for a broad range of free urban residents. Emperors and wealthy benefactors sometimes reduced costs further or sponsored construction as acts of public generosity. This helps explain why baths became such powerful symbols of Roman civilization. They projected an image of abundance. Warm rooms, running water, polished surfaces, and ordered public routines suggested that Roman rule could provide not just security and law, but comfort. In newly incorporated provinces, bathhouses could act as visible markers of Roman urban culture. To build baths was, in a sense, to build Rome itself in miniature. That said, Roman bathing was never entirely simple or universally admired. Moralists sometimes worried about excess, luxury, idleness, or mixed company. Writers such as Seneca complained about the noise of bathhouses and what he saw as the distractions of urban life. Other observers criticized vanity, elaborate perfumes, or the pursuit of physical comfort. These complaints tell us something useful. Baths were so central to daily life that they became a natural target for larger Roman anxieties about discipline, masculinity, wealth, and moral decline. When authors criticized the baths, they were often really criticizing the society around them. Men and women both bathed, but arrangements varied by place and period. Some bathhouses had separate sections, separate entrances, or different hours for men and women. In some times and places, mixed bathing seems to have occurred, while in others it was discouraged or prohibited. The evidence is uneven, and practices likely changed according to local custom, architecture, and moral pressure. What matters most is that bathing was not a marginal activity. It involved a large portion of urban society, and the organization of bath spaces reflected broader Roman concerns about order, respectability, and status. Children, the elderly, soldiers, merchants, freedmen, and local elites could all encounter the bath in different ways. For the poor, it offered access to facilities that were impossible to reproduce at home. For the rich, it offered another stage on which refinement, patronage, and influence could be displayed. For soldiers stationed in frontier zones, baths carried a piece of Roman life into distant territories. Archaeologists have found bathhouses not only in the great cities of Italy but across the empire, from North Africa to Britain, because the Roman bath traveled with Roman administration, Roman engineering, and Roman habits of everyday life. Even the architecture conveyed a message. High vaults, symmetrical halls, rich stone veneers, mosaics, sculpture, and carefully planned circulation turned bathing into a civic experience. The body moved through an environment that expressed control, order, and wealth. The Roman state did not merely govern people through armies and taxes. It shaped daily expectation. It taught citizens and subjects alike to think of public amenities as part of organized urban existence. A bath was therefore both practical and ideological. It cleaned the body, but it also demonstrated that Rome could command stone, water, heat, labor, and time. And yet there was always a limit hidden inside the luxury. These complexes consumed vast amounts of wood and labor. They required maintenance, money, and political stability. When cities declined, budgets weakened, or infrastructure failed, baths became harder to sustain. Their grandeur depended on a functioning system behind the scenes. In that sense, Roman bathing offers a quiet lesson about empire itself. What appears natural and permanent in daily life may actually rest on delicate arrangements of supply, work, and power that have to be renewed every single day. So when we ask how Romans took baths, the answer is larger than the question first suggests. They entered public complexes built with remarkable engineering. As the Roman Empire grew larger and more prosperous, bathing gradually became not just a habit, but an expected rhythm of urban life. In many cities, the baths were busiest in the afternoon, often after the main work of the day had begun to slow. Shops might close, business matters would pause, and people drifted toward the bathhouses in a steady flow. This daily routine was so predictable that writers of the time occasionally mentioned it almost casually, the way someone today might refer to commuting or evening meals. To live in a Roman city often meant that bathing was simply part of the schedule. When a visitor arrived at the baths, the first experience was usually the changing room, known as the apoditorium. This was a large chamber lined with benches and niches in the walls where clothing could be stored. Wealthier bathers sometimes brought servants who would guard their belongings, but others relied on attendants who worked within the bathhouse. Theft was not unheard of, and some Roman writers even joked about the occasional disappearance of sandals or tunics. Still, the system generally worked well enough that thousands of people could pass through these spaces every week without major disruption. Once changed, many bathers spent time exercising before entering the heated rooms. The exercise courtyard, or palestra, was often an open space surrounded by colonnades. Here people practiced light athletic activities such as wrestling, throwing balls, or simple strength exercises. The goal was not intense competition but preparation. By warming the body and producing sweat, exercise made the later stages of bathing more effective. It also provided another opportunity for conversation and social interaction. Friends could meet here, discuss politics or trade, or simply observe the activity around them. From the courtyard, the bather would gradually move into the sequence of temperature-controlled rooms that formed the core of the bathing experience. The tepidarium acted as a gentle transition. It was warm, comfortable, and often richly decorated, sometimes with mosaic floors and painted walls. Because it was neither too hot nor too cold, people sometimes lingered here for longer periods, resting on benches and talking quietly. In many bathhouses, the tepidarium also served as the architectural center of the building, connecting the different bathing areas. Beyond it lay the caldarium, the hottest chamber in the complex. The air here could be thick with warmth, and the floors were heated from below by the hypocaust system. Visitors often sat near a basin of hot water or lowered themselves into a steaming pool. The intense heat opened the pores and encouraged perspiration. It was at this stage that oil was commonly applied to the skin. Bathers or their attendants spread olive oil across the body, allowing it to mix with sweat and dust accumulated during the day. After some time in the hot environment, the strigil was used to scrape the oil and impurities away. This curved metal tool was drawn along the arms, legs, and torso, removing the oily mixture in long strokes. It was a process that required patience and familiarity, and it left the skin surprisingly clean. Roman athletes had used similar techniques for centuries, and the practice carried over naturally into the public baths. Only after this scraping process would many bathers rinse themselves, either in warm water or in the colder pools elsewhere in the complex. The final stage often took place in the frigidarium, the cold room. Compared with the heavy warmth of the caldarium, the frigidarium felt bright and refreshing. Many contained large cold pools where bathers could plunge briefly into cool water. This sudden change in temperature was invigorating, and Roman writers sometimes described it as the perfect ending to the bathing cycle. After the cold immersion, the body felt clean, alert, and relaxed all at once. But for many Romans, leaving the frigidarium did not mean leaving the baths immediately. People frequently remained inside the complex long after the washing process was complete. They might sit and talk, receive a massage, listen to readings, or simply enjoy the atmosphere of the place. In larger bathhouses, there were gardens, shaded walkways, and even small libraries. The baths were therefore not just about hygiene. They were environments designed to hold people for hours, blending relaxation, conversation, and civic life into a single shared space. In the largest imperial bath complexes, the scale could be almost overwhelming. The baths of Caracalla in Rome, for example, covered an enormous area and could accommodate thousands of visitors at once. Vast vaulted ceilings rose above pools and marble floors, while statues and decorative columns filled the surrounding halls. To someone arriving in Rome from a smaller town, such a place must have seemed astonishing. The bath complex alone could rival the size of entire neighborhoods elsewhere in the empire. Maintaining such enormous facilities required an immense amount of organization. Fires in the furnaces had to burn continuously to heat the hypocaust system. Workers carried wood, controlled airflow, and ensured that the temperature in each room remained stable. Water flowed through pipes, pools had to be cleaned, and stone surfaces needed constant care. Beneath the calm routines enjoyed by visitors was a hidden workforce that kept the entire operation functioning day after day. And this is perhaps one of the most revealing aspects of Roman bathing culture. On the surface, the baths appeared effortless. Beyond the routines of bathing itself, Roman bathhouses also functioned as places where the rhythms of social hierarchy could be observed in subtle ways. Although the entrance fee was often low enough that many citizens could afford it, the experience inside the baths was not identical for everyone. Wealthier Romans frequently arrived with attendants who carried oils, towels, and personal grooming tools. These attendants might assist with scraping the skin, guarding clothing, or arranging massages after the bathing sequence. For elite visitors, the baths were not only a place for cleanliness, but also another setting where status and comfort could quietly be displayed. At the same time, the baths were one of the few public environments where different layers of Roman society could appear in the same architectural space. Merchants, craftsmen, local officials, soldiers, and travelers could all move through the same sequence of rooms. Conversations crossed social boundaries more easily here than in formal political settings. A business agreement might begin beside the exercise yard, or a casual conversation in the warm room might develop into a professional connection. In this way, the bathhouse served as a kind of informal civic center, where relationships were formed and maintained through repeated daily encounters. Writers from the Roman world occasionally described the soundscape of these buildings, and their descriptions remind us that the baths were lively rather than silent. One famous account mentions the mixture of splashing water, voices echoing under vaulted ceilings, the slap of athletes practicing in the courtyard, and the calls of attendants moving through the halls. Vendors might sell small items such as oils or refreshments nearby. Barbers sometimes operated within or close to the bath complex, offering haircuts and grooming services to visitors who wished to combine several aspects of personal care in a single visit. Despite this activity, the architecture of the baths created a sense of order. The sequence of rooms guided movement carefully, and the design encouraged a gradual transition from activity to relaxation. High ceilings allowed heat and steam to circulate, while windows placed high in the walls admitted soft daylight. Marble surfaces reflected light and helped maintain a feeling of cleanliness. Even the arrangement of pools and benches influenced how people moved, rested, and interacted with one another. Regional differences also shaped the bathing experience across the empire. In the warmer provinces of North Africa or the Eastern Mediterranean, bathhouses sometimes included larger open courtyards and swimming areas that took advantage of the climate. In colder regions, such as northern Gaul or Roman Britain, the heated rooms played an even more central role. Archaeological discoveries from these provinces show how Roman engineers adapted their designs to local conditions while preserving the overall structure of the bathing tradition. The spread of bathhouses across distant territories reveals something important about Roman cultural influence. When Roman authorities established or reorganized a town, constructing baths was often among the earliest public works projects. These buildings signaled that a settlement had become part of the Roman urban network. Alongside roads, forums, and temples, baths represented a shared model of city life. To step inside one in Britain or Syria was to encounter an environment instantly recognizable to someone from Italy. Even so, Roman bathing habits continued to evolve over the centuries. Some emperors invested enormous resources into building grand complexes in the capital city. The baths of Trajan, the baths of Caracalla, and later the baths of Diocletian were not merely practical facilities. They were monumental statements about imperial generosity and the power of Roman engineering. Their massive halls, towering vaults, and extensive gardens transformed the simple act of bathing into an experience that could feel almost ceremonial. Yet, for the ordinary Roman citizen, the essential experience remained familiar and steady. A visit to the baths meant moving through warmth and water, cleaning the body with oil and strigil, and spending time among neighbors and acquaintances. It was an activity repeated day after day, year after year, across hundreds of cities. Through this routine, the baths became deeply woven into Roman identity. They reflected Rome's belief in organized public space, its confidence in large-scale engineering, and its emphasis on shared civic life. What began as a practical method of washing gradually turned into one of the defining features of Roman urban culture, leaving behind ruins that still hint at the scale and ambition of the world that built them. The experience of Roman bathing also reflected a broader philosophy about the balance between work, rest, and public life. Roman writers often discussed the concept of odium, a form of leisure that was not simply idleness but a necessary pause from labor and political duty. The baths fit naturally into this idea. After hours spent managing businesses, conducting legal affairs, or overseeing trade, citizens could step into an environment specifically designed for relaxation and restoration. Warm rooms slowed the pace of movement, water eased tired muscles, and familiar faces created an atmosphere where conversation flowed easily. For many Romans, this daily visit to the baths acted as a transition between the responsibilities of the day and the quieter hours of the evening. The rhythm was so regular that it shaped the daily schedule of entire cities. Workers planned their tasks around the bathing hours, and public activity often shifted as large numbers of people made their way toward these complexes in the late afternoon. In this sense, the baths were not just a building within the city. They helped structure the city's daily flow of life. Archaeological discoveries have revealed that bathhouses also contained a surprising range of additional services. Some complexes included small rooms where massages were offered, using oils infused with herbs or fragrances. Others had spaces where visitors could receive medical treatments or simple physical therapies. Roman medicine often emphasized the importance of heat, water, and bodily balance, and the baths provided an environment where these ideas could easily be applied. Warm immersion and gentle scraping of the skin were believed to improve circulation and remove impurities from the body. Food and refreshment could also be found nearby. While the main bathing areas were not intended for eating, vendors frequently operated around the entrances or in adjacent courtyards. Visitors might purchase fruit, bread, or light snacks after finishing their bathing routine. This small marketplace atmosphere added another layer to the bathhouse as a social hub. People arrived not only to wash, but to spend time, exchange news, and observe the changing patterns of daily life. One particularly interesting detail is the way Roman baths encouraged a shared understanding of public behavior. Because so many people used these spaces together, customs gradually developed about how one should act. Visitors were expected to respect the sequence of rooms, to avoid overcrowding particular pools, and to maintain a basic level of decorum even in a lively environment. Attendants supervised certain areas to ensure that the system continued to function smoothly. In this way, the bathhouse became a place where individuals practiced the unwritten rules of urban society. The role of the bathhouse in education and intellectual life should not be overlooked either. In the larger complexes, philosophers and teachers sometimes gathered in quiet corners to discuss ideas with students or acquaintances. Reading aloud was a common pastime in the Roman world, and it occasionally took place within or near the bath environment. Because so many citizens passed through the complex each day, it provided a convenient meeting point for intellectual exchange as well as social interaction. Yet perhaps the most remarkable feature of Roman bathing culture is how ordinary it became. For modern observers, the architecture and engineering of these complexes can feel extraordinary, almost monumental in scale. But for the Romans themselves, the bathhouse was simply part of life. Children grew up visiting them with family members, travelers sought them out in unfamiliar towns, and soldiers encountered them even at distant military outposts. Across the vast geography of the Roman Empire, from the warm cities of North Africa to the cooler provinces of Northern Europe, the bathhouse stood as a recognizable symbol of Roman daily comfort. Wherever these structures appeared, they brought with them a familiar routine: changing clothes, warming the body, cleaning the skin with oil, plunging into cold water, and sharing conversation beneath vaulted ceilings. Over time, these routines created a cultural pattern that linked distant communities together. A resident of Rome, a merchant in Gaul, and a soldier stationed in Britain could all recognize the experience of moving through the warm and cool chambers of a bathhouse. In that sense, bathing was more than hygiene. It was one of the quiet habits that helped bind the Roman world into a shared civilization. And even today, when we walk through the silent ruins of ancient bath complexes, the structure of that experience is still visible. The changing rooms, the heated floors, the pools of varying temperatures, and the wide halls designed for gathering all remain as clues. They remind us that behind the grand narratives of empire, armies, emperors, and conquests, there were also daily rituals. Simple acts like bathing carried within them the rhythms, technologies, and social patterns that shaped Roman life for centuries. As impressive as the great bath complexes were, not every Roman bathhouse was enormous or richly decorated. In smaller towns across the empire, baths were often more modest buildings, yet they still followed the same essential principles. A visitor entering a bathhouse in a provincial town in Gaul or a settlement along the Rhine would recognize the familiar sequence of rooms, even if the scale was smaller and the decoration simpler. Stone walls might replace marble and the pools might be narrower, but the rhythm of warming, cleaning, and cooling the body remained largely the same. Archaeologists have discovered these smaller bathhouses in remarkable numbers. From North Africa to the edges of Roman Britain, the remains of heated floors, furnace rooms, and bathing chambers appear again and again in excavations. Even in military forts, bathhouses were considered essential. Roman soldiers were expected to maintain discipline not only in training but also in daily hygiene. For men stationed far from home on cold frontiers, the bathhouse provided a rare sense of normal Roman life. Warm air rising through the hypocaust system must have felt especially welcome during long winters along the empire's northern borders. These military bathhouses also reveal how carefully Roman engineers organized their heating systems. The furnace room, known as the prefurnium, was positioned so that hot air would move naturally beneath the floors of the heated chambers. Workers responsible for maintaining the fires had to keep the temperature stable while preventing smoke from entering the bathing rooms. It was a delicate balance. Too little heat and the baths would lose their comfort. Too much heat and the rooms could become unbearable. Fuel consumption was another challenge. Large bath complexes required vast amounts of wood to keep their furnaces burning. In cities with major bathhouses, supply systems had to ensure that wood arrived regularly and in sufficient quantity. This demand sometimes placed pressure on nearby forests, and in certain regions it influenced patterns of resource management. The smooth functioning of a bathhouse, therefore, depended not only on architecture but also on a steady flow of natural resources from the surrounding landscape. Water management was equally important. The pools inside Roman baths were not stagnant basins left untouched for long periods. Many bathhouses used flowing water systems connected to aqueducts or local springs. Fresh water entered the pools while used water drained away through carefully designed channels. In larger complexes, different pools might receive water at different temperatures, allowing bathers to move gradually from warm immersion to cooler baths without the need for constant reheating. Roman architects often paid careful attention to light as well. Large windows were placed strategically to allow sunlight to warm certain rooms during the day. In some caldaria, the hot room faced the direction of the afternoon sun, so that natural heat would assist the hypocaust system. This combination of sunlight, heated floors, and circulating air created an environment that felt both warm and bright. Visitors stepping into these chambers would experience a steady warmth that seemed almost effortless, even though it relied on a complex interaction of engineering and environmental design. The decoration of bathhouses also tells us something about Roman values. Walls were frequently covered with painted plaster or mosaics depicting geometric patterns, marine imagery, or mythological scenes connected to water and nature. Statues of gods associated with springs or health sometimes stood in niches along the halls. These decorative elements transformed the baths from purely practical facilities into places that felt refined and culturally significant. Bathing was presented not as a simple chore, but as an experience connected to beauty, art, and civic pride. Over centuries, this combination of architecture, engineering, and social custom made the Roman bathhouse one of the most recognizable institutions of the ancient world. Travelers arriving in a new city often sought out the baths soon after entering the gates. In doing so, they stepped into a familiar environment where the routines of Roman life unfolded in predictable ways. Even today, the ruins of these bathhouses offer a quiet glimpse into that world. Beneath fallen arches and broken columns, the outlines of heated floors and bathing pools still remain. They remind us that daily life in the Roman Empire was shaped not only by politics and warfare, but also by shared spaces where ordinary people gathered, relaxed, and followed routines that connected communities across thousands of miles of territory. Over time, however, the great bathing culture of the Roman world began to change. The system that supported thousands of bathhouses across the empire depended on a stable network of cities, resources, and administration. As long as Roman infrastructure remained strong, baths could operate with remarkable consistency. Aqueducts carried water across long distances, workers maintained furnaces, and civic authorities ensured that public buildings remained functional. But when these systems weakened, the bathhouses were often among the first places where the strain became visible. From the 3rd century onward, parts of the Roman world faced increasing political and economic pressures. Maintaining large public complexes required steady funding and labor. In some cities, repairs became less frequent, heating systems were used less often, and sections of baths were gradually abandoned. Archaeological evidence from several regions shows signs of this slow transformation. Pools were filled in, rooms were repurposed, and some bath buildings were eventually converted into workshops or storage areas. This did not happen everywhere at the same pace. In major cities such as Rome and Constantinople, large bath complexes continued operating for centuries. Imperial authorities still understood their importance as symbols of public generosity and urban life. Even in times of difficulty, emperors sometimes invested heavily in repairing or maintaining these structures. The baths remained visible reminders of Roman civilization and the benefits of organized city life. In other areas, however, the decline of urban infrastructure gradually altered bathing habits. Smaller towns that could no longer support large heated complexes began to rely on simpler facilities or private washing spaces. Without regular supplies of fuel and labor, the elaborate hypocaust systems became difficult to maintain. Over time, the daily social ritual that had once brought entire communities together started to fade in some regions. Cultural attitudes toward bathing also evolved. In the later centuries of the empire, new religious traditions began to shape ideas about public life and personal conduct. While bathing itself was not rejected, some writers expressed concern about excessive luxury or the social environment associated with large bathhouses. These debates reflected broader changes in Roman society, as old customs adapted to new cultural influences. Yet even as certain traditions shifted, the legacy of Roman bathing never fully disappeared. The architectural knowledge behind heated floors, controlled water systems, and large communal bathing spaces continued to influence later societies. In parts of the Mediterranean and the Middle East, bathing traditions evolved into new forms that still preserved elements of Roman design. The familiar sequence of warm rooms, steam chambers, and cooling pools can still be recognized in later bath cultures that developed centuries after the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Today, when archaeologists study the ruins of Roman bathhouses, they often find more than just walls and pools. They uncover traces of everyday life. Small objects such as oil bottles, fragments of strigils, hairpins, and coins appear in the layers of soil where bathers once walked. These items remind us that the baths were not abstract monuments. They were active places filled with ordinary routines repeated thousands of times. A visitor entering a Roman bath nearly 2,000 years ago would have experienced something both practical and communal. The warmth of the heated floors, the scent of olive oil, the echo of voices in high vaulted halls, and the refreshing shock of cold water all formed part of a familiar daily ritual. People came to wash, but they stayed to talk, observe, and participate in the shared life of the city. In this way, the Roman bathhouse tells us something essential about the civilization that built it. Rome was not defined only by its armies, roads, or political institutions. It was also defined by the ways in which people lived together in public spaces designed for comfort, conversation, and routine. The bathhouse stood at the center of that experience, quietly shaping the rhythm of daily life across an empire that stretched for thousands of miles. So when we imagine how Romans took baths, we are really imagining something larger than a simple act of washing. We are seeing a carefully organized system of architecture, engineering, labor, and social custom working together. Beneath the marble floors and vaulted ceilings, beneath the steam and the steady warmth of the hypocaust, there was an entire civilization expressing itself through one of the most ordinary moments of the day. Even after many Roman bathhouses fell into ruin, The idea behind them continued to influence how later societies thought about cleanliness and communal space. The Roman approach had shown that bathing could be more than a private necessity. It could also be a public experience shaped by architecture, engineering, and shared routine. In the centuries that followed the Roman era, different cultures adapted these ideas in their own ways, sometimes preserving elements of Roman design while adding new customs and meanings. One reason the Roman baths left such a lasting impression was the extraordinary level of planning behind them. A successful bathhouse required coordination between architects, engineers, laborers, and city officials. The building itself had to be carefully positioned within the city, often near a reliable water source or aqueduct connection. The heating system needed space for furnaces and service corridors hidden from the public areas. Drainage channels had to remove used water efficiently, preventing flooding or stagnation. Every part of the complex depended on the others functioning correctly. This careful planning reflected a larger Roman belief that cities should provide structured public services. Roads allowed people to travel efficiently, markets organized the exchange of goods, and bathhouses supported health and social life. Each element contributed to a broader sense that urban living could be orderly and comfortable when managed with skill. In many ways, the bathhouse symbolized that philosophy. It was a place where technology, civic investment, and daily routine all met in a single environment. Another remarkable feature of Roman bathing culture was its consistency across distance. Someone traveling from Italy to the provinces might encounter different languages, climates, and landscapes, yet the basic design of the bathhouse would feel familiar. The same progression of rooms, the same heated floors, and the same tools like the strigil appeared again and again across the empire. This familiarity helped reinforce the sense that Roman civilization shared common habits no matter how far its territories extended. For archaeologists and historians today, bathhouses provide valuable insight into everyday life that written sources alone cannot fully explain. The layout of rooms reveals how people moved through space, while the wear patterns on stone floors show where visitors gathered most often. Even the distribution of small objects found in excavations can indicate which areas were busiest or most frequently used. These clues allow researchers to reconstruct the routines that once filled these buildings with activity. In many excavated bath complexes, the furnace rooms tell particularly vivid stories. Layers of ash and charcoal reveal how intensely the heating systems were used. The brick pillars that supported raised floors still stand in some ruins, showing exactly how the hypocaust system once carried warm air beneath the bathing chambers. Standing among these remains today, it becomes easier to imagine the steady heat that once filled the rooms above. The survival of certain bathhouses also demonstrates the durability of Roman construction. Thick walls, vaulted ceilings, and strong foundations allowed some complexes to remain standing long after their original purpose had faded. In a few cases, later communities reused the structures for entirely different activities. Portions of bathhouses were transformed into workshops, homes, or even defensive buildings. Yet the outlines of pools and heating systems often remained visible, quietly preserving the memory of their original function. When we step back and look at the broader picture, Roman bathing culture reveals how deeply daily habits can shape a civilization. The act of washing, something that might seem simple and personal, became in Rome a shared experience supported by public investment and advanced engineering. Thousands of people could pass through a bathhouse each day, following a routine that balanced cleanliness, relaxation, and social interaction. In the end, the Roman bathhouse was more than a building filled with water and warm air. It was a reflection of Roman priorities. It showed how the empire valued organized urban life, technological ingenuity, and the idea that public spaces should serve the well-being of the community. Beneath the arches and marble halls, ordinary people carried out a routine that connected them to the larger system of Roman civilization. And perhaps that is why the ruins of these baths still capture attention today. They remind us that history is not only written in battles or political events. It is also found in the quiet, repeated moments of daily life. In the warmth of a heated floor, the cool shock of a plunge pool, and the steady conversations echoing through stone halls, the Roman world revealed itself one ordinary bath at a time. If we pause for a moment and imagine a typical afternoon in a Roman city at the height of the empire, the bathhouse becomes easier to picture not as a ruin, but as a living place. Streets would still be busy with carts and pedestrians, but gradually the pace of the city would begin to soften. Merchants closed their stalls, craftsmen finished their work, and citizens turned their attention toward the familiar destination that waited just a short walk away. The bathhouse doors stood open, and inside, the routines of the day were already underway. Visitors entered with the quiet expectation that this space belonged to everyone who lived in the city. The architecture encouraged that feeling. Wide halls allowed people to move comfortably, while the sequence of rooms guided them through the experience without confusion. Even someone visiting for the first time could quickly understand the pattern. Change clothes, warm the body, clean the skin, cool down, and finally rest. The design itself taught people how to use the building. Within these walls, time seemed to slow slightly. The tepidarium offered a gentle warmth that encouraged conversation and relaxation. Voices carried softly beneath the high ceilings, mixing with the sound of water and the distant movement of attendants. In the caldarium, the air felt heavier and more intense. Yet even here people followed a calm rhythm, applying oil, scraping the skin, and easing themselves into the hot pools. The frigidarium, with its cold water and open space, often felt like the final awakening after the long warmth of the previous rooms. A brief plunge into the cool pool refreshed the body and marked the end of the bathing sequence. Many bathers lingered nearby, drying themselves and speaking with friends before returning to the changing room. What is striking about this process is how ordinary it was for the Romans themselves. For modern observers, the engineering of heated floors and complex water systems may seem remarkable. But for someone living in a Roman city, the bathhouse was simply part of everyday life. Children grew up watching their parents follow the routine. Travelers expected to find baths in any well-established town. Soldiers stationed on distant frontiers recognized the familiar structure as a small piece of home. The baths also reflected a deeper Roman understanding of community. In a society where much of life took place in public spaces, forums, markets, temples, and streets. The bathhouse added another setting where people could gather in a structured yet relaxed environment. Political discussions might begin here, friendships might strengthen, and news of the city could spread quietly from one conversation to the next. Even emperors understood the symbolic power of these buildings. When rulers funded the construction of large bath complexes, they were doing more than providing a service. They were demonstrating generosity, stability, and the ability of the Roman state to care for its citizens. Marble halls, flowing water, and heated rooms became visible proof that the empire could organize resources on an extraordinary scale. And yet, for all their grandeur, the baths ultimately served a very simple human purpose. They offered warmth after a long day, cleanliness after work, and a place where people could pause and reconnect with their community. Beneath the sophisticated engineering and architectural beauty, the bathhouse remained a space shaped by ordinary human needs. Today, when we walk through the quiet remains of these complexes, the water is gone and the voices have faded. The hypocaust floors stand empty, and the great halls are open to the sky. But the structure of the experience still survives in stone. The sequence of rooms, the pools, and the furnace chambers beneath the floors all remain as silent evidence of a routine once shared by millions. Through these ruins, we gain a small window into how Romans lived their daily lives. Not through dramatic events or grand ceremonies, but through a simple ritual repeated afternoon after afternoon. The Roman bathhouse reminds us that history often lives in the ordinary moments. In the warmth of a room, the movement of water, and the quiet conversations that once echoed through the heart of an ancient city. As evening approached, the bathhouse gradually began to empty. The busiest hours had passed, and visitors who had spent time exercising, bathing, and talking slowly gathered their belongings in the changing room. Tunics were pulled back over shoulders, sandals were fastened, and the warmth of the interior gave way to the cooler air of the streets outside. The routine that had unfolded within the baths for hours quietly dissolved as people returned to their homes, markets, or evening meals. This transition from the bathhouse back into the city was part of the larger rhythm of Roman daily life. After bathing, many people felt refreshed and relaxed, ready for the final activities of the day. Families gathered for dinner, friends met again in homes or taverns, and the streets of the city slowly shifted into a calmer pace. In this way, the bathhouse acted almost like a bridge between the public responsibilities of the day and the more private hours of the evening. For Romans, this pattern repeated so regularly that it became almost invisible within their culture. The bathhouse was not something extraordinary or rare. It was simply expected. Writers mentioned it in passing, travelers described it briefly in their accounts, and city planners included it naturally among the essential buildings of an urban settlement. Much like roads or marketplaces, baths were seen as part of the basic structure that made a city function properly. The popularity of bathing also reveals something important about Roman attitudes toward health and cleanliness. While ancient medical knowledge was very different from modern science, many Roman physicians believed that warmth, water, and controlled physical activity helped maintain balance in the body. Bathing after exercise was thought to remove impurities and restore comfort to tired muscles. Even if the scientific explanations were different from those we understand today, the practical benefits of relaxation, washing, and gentle movement were certainly real. At the same time, Roman baths encouraged a shared experience that strengthened social connections within cities. Because so many people followed the same routine each afternoon, the bathhouse became a place where familiar faces appeared again and again. A merchant might see the same customers every week. A local official might meet the same citizens in the warm rooms, and neighbors might exchange news during the slow cooling period after a cold plunge. Over time, these repeated encounters created a sense of community that extended beyond individual households. In this sense, the Roman bathhouse was more than architecture or engineering. It was a daily meeting place where the life of the city quietly unfolded. The warmth of the rooms and the rhythm of the bathing sequence provided a comfortable environment for conversation and observation. People could see how their neighbors were doing, hear news from travelers, and maintain relationships that formed the fabric of urban society. When we look back at the Roman world today, it is easy to focus on the dramatic elements of its history: emperors, armies, political conflicts, and the rise and fall of power. Yet the bathhouse reminds us that the strength of Roman civilization also depended on ordinary routines shared by millions of people. These routines created stability and familiarity in a vast empire that stretched across continents. A simple visit to the baths connected citizens to the wider systems that supported their world. The water flowing into the pools came from distant aqueducts. The heat beneath the floors relied on carefully maintained furnaces. The building itself was constructed through coordinated labor and public investment. Even a quiet afternoon of bathing reflected the complex organization of Roman society. Today, the ruins of Roman bathhouses remain scattered across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Their arches and foundations still mark the places where people once gathered to wash, relax, and talk. Although centuries have passed since the last fires burned beneath their floors, the design of these buildings still tells the story of how Romans lived. And in that story, the act of bathing becomes something surprisingly meaningful. It shows how a civilization expressed its values not only through monuments and laws, but through the careful shaping of everyday life. In warm rooms filled with steam and quiet conversation, the Romans created spaces where comfort, technology, and community came together, one bath at a time. If we continue to follow the life of a Roman bathhouse through the course of a typical day, we begin to see just how deeply it was woven into the structure of the city. Long before the afternoon crowds arrived, the building itself was already awake with activity. Workers responsible for the furnaces entered the service areas early, preparing the fires that would heat the hypocaust system. Wood was stacked carefully, ashes from the previous day were cleared, and the first flames were lit beneath the floors. Slowly, warm air began to travel through the hollow spaces beneath the bathing chambers. At the same time, attendants inspected the pools and water channels. Fresh water flowed in from pipes connected to the city's supply, and drains ensured that yesterday's water had been carried away. Floors were swept, benches were wiped down, and oils and tools used by bathers were arranged for the day ahead. None of this work was visible to the average visitor, but without it the bathhouse could not function. By midday the building was ready. Sunlight filtered through high windows, reflecting softly across the marble or stone surfaces. The tepidarium held a gentle warmth, the caldarium gradually filled with hotter air, and the cold pool in the frigidarium waited quietly beneath its vaulted ceiling. From the outside, the bathhouse appeared calm, almost silent, but inside everything had been prepared for the arrival of the city. Then, gradually, people began to enter. The first visitors were often those with flexible schedules, men who had finished their morning business early, travelers passing through the city, or individuals who preferred a quieter experience before the crowds arrived. They moved through the rooms at an unhurried pace, enjoying the warmth and space that the baths offered before the busiest hours began. As the afternoon progressed, however, the bathhouse became more lively. Groups of friends arrived together, discussing the day's events as they removed their clothing in the changing room. Others headed straight toward the exercise courtyard, where the sounds of movement echoed beneath the colonnades. Balls were thrown back and forth, wrestlers tested their strength, and laughter carried through the open air. From there, the steady flow of bathers moved deeper into the complex. The tepidarium filled with people resting on benches or leaning against the warm walls. Conversations rose and fell in gentle waves as individuals came and went. Some spoke quietly about family matters or trade, while others debated politics or news from distant provinces. Beyond this comfortable chamber waited the caldarium, glowing with heat from the hypocaust below. Visitors entered slowly, adjusting to the temperature before approaching the hot pools. Steam drifted through the air, and the scent of olive oil lingered as bathers applied it to their skin. Attendants worked carefully with strigils, scraping away oil and sweat in long practiced motions. Eventually, most bathers made their way toward the final stage of the process. The frigidarium offered a sudden contrast, a wide space with cool air and cold water waiting below. One by one, bathers stepped down into the pool or plunged briefly beneath the surface. The shock of the cold water was refreshing, a moment that many Romans described as the most invigorating part of the experience. Afterward, the pace slowed again. People rested, dried themselves, and continued their conversations. Some remained for long stretches of time, enjoying the relaxed environment created by the bathhouse architecture. Others began preparing to leave, retrieving their clothing and stepping back into the streets of the city. What is remarkable is how predictable this entire sequence was. Across the Roman Empire, from the great capital of Rome to distant provincial towns, the same pattern repeated itself day after day. The details might change, the size of the pools, the decoration of the halls, the number of visitors, but the essential rhythm remained familiar. Through this routine, the bathhouse quietly shaped the daily experience of Roman life. It provided a place where people could slow down, reconnect with others, and take part in a shared tradition that stretched across thousands of miles of territory. Even now, centuries later, the surviving ruins still preserve the outline of that experience. The raised floors of the hypocaust, the basins where water once shimmered, and the vast halls where voices once echoed all remain as silent witnesses to one of the most ordinary yet remarkable habits of the ancient Roman world. As the sun began to lower toward the horizon, the atmosphere inside the bathhouse slowly changed. The busiest hours passed, and the crowds that once filled the halls gradually thinned. The echo of voices softened, footsteps became less frequent, and attendants moved more freely through the rooms. For those who remained, the baths now felt calmer, almost reflective. Warm air still drifted through the heated chambers, but the urgency of the afternoon had faded into a quiet rhythm. Some visitors chose this time deliberately. Late bathers often preferred the gentler pace of the evening, when the pools were less crowded and conversations became more relaxed. In the tepidarium, small groups might sit together discussing the events of the day, while others rested silently against the warm stone walls. The steady heat beneath the floors continued its quiet work, radiating upward through the chambers exactly as Roman engineers had designed centuries earlier. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the workers who maintained the bathhouse were already preparing for the next stage of the day. Furnaces still burned, but attendants began adjusting the fires so that the temperature would gradually decline through the night. Water channels were inspected once more, and service corridors beneath the floors were checked to ensure that the hypocaust system remained safe and clear. For many bathhouses, the final visitors left shortly before nightfall. Roman cities relied heavily on daylight, and once darkness settled over the streets, most public activities slowed considerably. Lamps could illuminate interior spaces, but maintaining large public buildings after dark was costly and impractical. As a result, the bathhouse followed the natural rhythm of the sun. The last bathers returned to the apoditorium to retrieve their clothing. The familiar benches and wall niches that had held garments all afternoon were now nearly empty. Tunics were pulled on again, sandals tightened, and visitors prepared to step back outside. After hours spent in warm rooms and cool pools, the evening air of the city felt noticeably different, cooler, quieter, and carrying the scent of cooking fires beginning to appear throughout the neighborhoods. Outside the bathhouse, the city had also changed its pace. Market stalls were closing, families gathered for meals, and the noise of the daytime streets softened into the quieter sounds of evening life. For many Romans, the visit to the baths marked a clear turning point in the day. Work had ended, the body had been refreshed, and the evening could now begin. What makes this daily ritual so fascinating is how consistent it was across the empire. Whether in the bustling capital of Rome, the port cities of the Mediterranean, or the distant towns of the northern provinces, bathhouses helped structure the rhythm of urban life. People expected them to be there, just as they expected roads, markets, and temples. The presence of a bathhouse signaled that a city possessed the organization, engineering, and resources associated with Roman civilization. And yet, for all their architectural sophistication, the baths ultimately served a very simple purpose. They offered warmth, water, and a place where people could pause together at the end of the day. In a world without modern plumbing or private bathrooms for most citizens, this shared space allowed communities to maintain cleanliness while also strengthening social connections. Today, when historians and archaeologists study Roman bathhouses, they often see them as windows into everyday life. The massive halls and complex heating systems reveal the technological abilities of the Romans, but the smaller details, benches worn smooth by centuries of visitors, drains carved into stone floors, fragments of oil flasks and grooming tools, tell quieter stories about the people who used these spaces. Each of those objects once belonged to someone who walked through the bathhouse doors just as countless others had done before. They followed the same sequence of rooms, experienced the same warmth rising from the floors, and shared the same conversations that echoed through the chambers. In the end, the Roman bathhouse reminds us that history is not only shaped by emperors and armies. It is also shaped by daily habits repeated over generations. For the Romans, bathing was one of those habits, a routine that blended engineering, social life, and personal care into a single experience. And through that routine, the Roman world revealed one of its most enduring qualities: the ability to transform even the ordinary act of washing into a carefully designed part of civic life. By the time night finally settled over a Roman city, the bathhouse stood quiet again. The fires beneath the floors burned lower, the pools were still, and the long halls that had echoed with voices throughout the afternoon now rested in silence. For a few hours, the complex returned to a state that most visitors never witnessed, a carefully engineered structure waiting for the next cycle of daily life to begin again. To modern observers, the scale of Roman bathhouses can seem almost excessive for something as ordinary as bathing. But for the Romans, these buildings represented more than comfort. They were part of a broader belief that public life should include shared spaces designed for well-being. A Roman city was not simply a collection of homes and markets. It was an organized environment where citizens moved through streets, forums, theaters, and baths in patterns that encouraged interaction and community. Bathhouses played a particularly important role in this structure because they brought together many aspects of Roman culture at once. They demonstrated the empire's engineering ability through aqueducts, heating systems, and architectural planning. They supported social life by providing places where people could gather informally. They even reflected Roman ideas about health, balance, and the proper care of the body. When we consider the vast territory controlled by Rome at its height, from Britain in the northwest to Egypt in the southeast, it becomes even more impressive that the bathhouse tradition spread so widely. Wherever Roman administration established new towns or expanded older settlements, bath complexes often followed. Their presence signaled that the city belonged to the wider Roman world, connected by shared customs and infrastructure. A traveler moving through the empire would quickly notice this familiarity. The languages spoken in the streets might change, the local foods might be different, and the climate might feel unfamiliar. But the moment that traveler stepped into a bathhouse, the experience would feel recognizable. The arrangement of rooms, the warmth rising through the floors, the cold plunge waiting at the end of the bathing sequence, all of it reflected a common cultural pattern repeated across thousands of miles. This shared experience helped create a subtle sense of unity throughout the empire. Even people who never visited Rome itself could participate in a routine that originated in Roman urban life. In that sense, bathing became a quiet expression of Roman identity. It connected distant communities through daily habits rather than political authority alone. At the same time, the bathhouse reveals the complex systems that supported Roman civilization. The warmth in the caldarium depended on fuel gathered from forests outside the city. The water flowing into the pools required aqueducts stretching across valleys and hills. Workers maintained furnaces, cleaned floors, and repaired pipes behind the scenes. What appeared effortless to visitors was actually the result of careful organization and constant labor. This hidden complexity is part of what makes Roman baths so fascinating to historians today. They show how technological innovation and social custom could combine to shape everyday life. The Romans did not invent the idea of washing in groups, but they expanded it into a highly structured institution supported by advanced engineering. Even centuries after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the influence of these bathhouses continued. In many parts of Europe and the Mediterranean, later bathing traditions preserved elements of Roman design. Heated rooms, steam chambers, and communal washing spaces remained important features of urban life in various forms. Today, when visitors walk through the ruins of ancient bath complexes such as those in Rome, Pompeii, or Bath in England, they encounter spaces that still carry the outlines of their original purpose. The large halls, the pools carved into stone, and the rows of brick pillars that once supported heated floors all remain visible. Standing among those ruins, it becomes easier to imagine what the bathhouse once meant to the people who used it. It was not merely a place to wash away the dust of the day. It was a place where neighbors met, conversations unfolded, and the routines of Roman life repeated themselves quietly and consistently. In the end, understanding how Romans took baths reveals something deeper about their world. It shows how a powerful empire expressed itself not only through armies and monuments, but through the everyday environments it built for its citizens. Beneath the marble floors and vaulted ceilings, the Roman bathhouse brought together technology, architecture, and social life in a way that few other institutions could match. And through that daily ritual, warm rooms, oil and strigils, cold plunges, and lingering conversations, the Romans turned the simple act of bathing into one of the most enduring symbols of their civilization. If we step back from the architectural details and the engineering achievements, the Roman bathhouse ultimately tells us something very human about the civilization that built it. Empires are often remembered through their wars, their rulers, and the borders they controlled. Yet daily life within those empires was shaped by far quieter habits. For the Romans, bathing was one of those habits, a repeated moment of pause that connected individuals to their city and to each other. The bathhouse was a place where the boundaries between different parts of society could soften, at least for a short time. Citizens who spent the morning conducting business, arguing cases in courts, or managing workshops all arrived in the same environment during the afternoon. Within the warm rooms and open courtyards, the formal structure of the day gave way to something more relaxed. Conversations could wander from trade to politics, from family matters to stories brought by travelers from distant provinces. This shared space encouraged a certain rhythm of observation. People noticed who arrived regularly and who had been absent for several days. News spread quickly in such environments. A successful merchant venture, a political decision in the city council, or a shipment arriving at the harbor might all become topics of discussion within the bathhouse walls. In this way, the baths quietly served as information networks long before any organized system of news or communication existed. The architecture itself supported this atmosphere. Roman bathhouses were designed not only for washing but also for lingering. Wide halls allowed visitors to sit and talk, while pools were often positioned so that bathers faced one another. Even the exercise courtyards functioned as gathering places where people could watch games or participate casually. The entire building encouraged movement between activity and rest, creating opportunities for interaction at every stage. It is also important to remember that these experiences were repeated constantly across the empire. Every afternoon, in city after city, thousands of people moved through the same sequence of rooms. They warmed themselves in the tepidarium, sweated in the caldarium, and cooled their bodies in the frigidarium. The repetition of this routine helped create a sense of normal life that extended far beyond any single city. For soldiers stationed on distant frontiers, bathhouses offered a rare reminder of the culture they served. In forts along the Rhine or the deserts of the Middle East, the presence of a bath complex brought a piece of Roman routine into unfamiliar landscapes. The warm rooms and flowing water helped maintain morale and discipline among troops who might otherwise feel isolated from the centers of Roman life. Merchants and travelers experienced something similar. Moving from one province to another often meant encountering unfamiliar customs, languages, and foods. Yet the bathhouse remained a recognizable institution. A traveler could arrive in a foreign city and still understand how to move through its baths without instruction. That familiarity created a subtle but powerful sense of connection across the empire. The bathhouse also reflected Roman attitudes toward the balance between the body and the mind. Many Roman writers believed that physical well-being supported mental clarity and civic responsibility. Exercise, bathing, and conversation formed a natural sequence that prepared individuals for the next day's work. In this way, the baths were not simply places of comfort but environments that reinforced the idea of an orderly, balanced life. Of course, not every experience within the baths was perfectly calm or harmonious. Writers occasionally complained about noise, crowds, or excessive luxury. Some criticized individuals who spent too much time in these spaces rather than attending to serious responsibilities. These criticisms reveal that even in the ancient world, people debated how leisure should be used and what role public comfort should play in society. Yet the very presence of those debates highlights how central the bathhouse had become. Few other institutions were so deeply woven into the routines of Roman citizens. The baths were visited not once a week or once a month, but often every single day. Over the course of a lifetime, an individual might pass through those warm halls thousands of times. When archaeologists uncover bath complexes today, they often find layers of history preserved within the walls and floors. Repairs made during different centuries reveal how long these buildings remained active. New mosaics replaced older decorations, pipes were adjusted to improve water flow, and additional rooms were sometimes added as cities grew. Each modification tells the story of a community continuing to invest in a shared public space. Even after many bathhouses fell out of use, the remains continued to influence later generations. Massive stone walls were reused in new construction, and the outlines of pools sometimes remained visible long after the roofs had collapsed. In some places, entire neighborhoods developed around the ruins of former bath complexes, integrating fragments of Roman architecture into the evolving landscape of medieval cities. Today, when visitors walk through the silent remains of these structures, it requires a small act of imagination to restore the life that once filled them. The pools are empty, the hypocaust pillars stand exposed, and the marble decorations are often gone. But the layout still speaks clearly. When historians reflect on the Roman bathhouse, they often describe it as one of the clearest windows into the everyday world of the ancient city. Grand monuments such as temples and triumphal arches tell us how Rome presented its power. But the baths reveal something different. They show how ordinary people moved through their day, how they relaxed, how they cared for their bodies, and how they interacted with the community around them. In many ways, the bathhouse acted as a kind of social equalizer within the structured hierarchy of Roman society. Although wealth and status still mattered, the simple act of bathing created moments where different individuals shared the same environment. A craftsman who spent the morning shaping metal or carving might later sit in the tepidarium beside a local official or merchant. Their social positions outside the bathhouse might be very different, yet inside they followed the same sequence of rooms and the same routine of cleansing and relaxation. This does not mean that Roman society suddenly became equal within the baths. Wealthier visitors still had advantages. They often arrived with servants who carried oils, towels, and grooming tools. Some bath complexes even contained areas reserved for higher status visitors. Yet despite these differences, the bathhouse remained one of the few public spaces where daily contact between many layers of society occurred naturally. For the Romans, this shared experience reinforced the idea that urban life was built upon participation in common institutions. Citizens gathered in the forum to discuss politics and legal matters. They visited markets to trade goods and obtain supplies. They attended theaters and public games for entertainment. And in the afternoon, they met in the baths to wash, exercise, and talk. Each of these spaces contributed to the rhythm of the city. The baths also encouraged habits of routine and predictability. Because many people visited them nearly every day, they became familiar landmarks within the urban landscape. Residents knew the best hours to arrive if they wanted a quiet experience, and they knew when the crowds would be at their busiest. Certain groups developed informal schedules, meeting friends or colleagues at regular times within the same rooms. Over the course of years, these repeated visits created a sense of continuity. Generations passed through the same halls. Fathers introduced their sons to the bathing routine, teaching them how to move from room to room and how to use the strigil properly after applying oil. Young men who exercised in the palestra eventually returned years later as older citizens, still following the same sequence of warmth, water, and conversation. From an archaeological perspective, this long continuity is visible in the layers of construction found within bath complexes. Floors were repaired and replaced many times, pools were expanded or reshaped, and heating systems were modified to improve efficiency. Some bathhouses remained active for several centuries, adapting gradually to the needs of the communities around them. The materials used in these buildings also demonstrate the pride cities placed in their baths. Marble panels, mosaics, and decorative sculptures transformed the spaces into environments that felt both practical and beautiful. Scenes of sea creatures, flowing water, and mythological figures often decorated the walls and floors. These artistic elements reinforced the association between bathing, nature, and well-being. Even the layout of the buildings reflected a sense of balance and harmony. Roman architects designed the bathhouse sequence so that visitors experienced gradual changes in temperature and atmosphere. The warm tepidarium prepared the body gently for the intense heat of the caldarium, while the cold plunge of the frigidarium completed the process with a refreshing contrast. Moving through the baths felt almost like following a carefully planned journey for the body. As the centuries passed and the Roman world changed, some bathhouses eventually fell silent. Aqueducts deteriorated, furnaces stopped burning, and the pools dried out. Yet even in ruin, these structures continued to shape the landscapes of former Roman cities. Their walls remained standing long after roofs had collapsed, and later generations sometimes reused the stones for new buildings. Today, when visitors walk through sites such as Pompeii, Ostia, or the city of Bath in England, the outlines of these complexes remain remarkably clear. The raised floors of the hypocaust, the empty basins of the pools, and the large vaulted halls still suggest how the space once functioned. Standing there, it becomes easier to imagine the steady movement of people through the rooms. We can picture the quiet warmth rising from the floors, the sound of water splashing in the pools, and the conversations that once echoed beneath the arches. Each of those moments formed part of a daily rhythm repeated across the Roman world for centuries. In the end, the story of how Romans took baths is not only about engineering or architecture. It is about the habits that shaped everyday life within one of history's most influential civilizations. Through a simple routine of warmth, water, and conversation, millions of people participated in a shared experience that helped define what it meant to live in the Roman world. In the final moments of the day, when the bathhouse doors were closed and the fires beneath the floors had been allowed to fade, the building returned to a quiet state that most Romans rarely witnessed. Without the voices of bathers or the steady movement of attendants, the halls stood still. Pools reflected faint light from the last lamps, and the warmth that had filled the rooms slowly drifted away through stone walls and high ceilings. Yet by the following morning, the entire cycle would begin again. This daily repetition is one of the most remarkable aspects of Roman bathing culture. For centuries, across hundreds of cities, the same routine unfolded again and again. Workers prepared the furnaces, water flowed through pipes and pools, and citizens gradually gathered in the afternoon to follow the familiar sequence of rooms. It was a system so dependable that most people rarely thought about the effort required to maintain it. Behind the comfort of the bathhouse stood an entire network of labor and organization. Woodcutters gathered fuel in forests outside the city. Carters transported that wood to the furnaces where it would be burned to heat the hypocaust. Engineers designed aqueducts that carried water from distant hills and springs. Attendants cleaned the pools, repaired surfaces, and supervised the movement of visitors. All of these tasks were necessary to support what appeared to be a simple daily activity. For the average Roman citizen, however, the bathhouse was experienced in a much simpler way. It was a place to relax after work, to wash away sweat and dust, and to meet others in a comfortable environment. Many people came not only for cleanliness but also for the social atmosphere. A person might arrive intending to bathe quickly, yet remain for hours, caught up in conversation or resting in the warm chambers. The architecture encouraged this slower pace. Wide halls and open courtyards allowed people to linger without feeling crowded. The sequence of rooms guided visitors naturally from activity toward relaxation. By the time someone finished the cold plunge in the frigidarium, the body felt refreshed and the mind often calmer than when they had first entered the building. Roman writers occasionally described this feeling with quiet appreciation. Although some critics complained about noise or luxury, others recognized the baths as places where the burdens of daily life could temporarily fade. In a society filled with responsibilities, legal disputes, trade negotiations, political obligations, the bathhouse offered a predictable moment of rest. It is also important to remember that most Romans did not have elaborate bathing facilities in their homes. Private houses, especially those belonging to ordinary citizens, rarely included large heated baths. Public bathhouses therefore provided access to amenities that individuals could not easily create on their own. Through shared infrastructure, entire communities enjoyed comfort that would otherwise have been limited to the wealthy. This idea of shared public benefit was central to Roman urban culture. Roads, aqueducts, theaters, and baths all served large populations rather than individual households. The Roman state and wealthy benefactors often invested in these projects because they strengthened civic pride and demonstrated the advantages of organized city life. Bathhouses, perhaps more than any other building, made those advantages visible. Warm rooms, flowing water, and elegant halls showed visitors that the city possessed both technical knowledge and resources. Even someone who had never traveled beyond their local region could see evidence of Roman engineering every time they stepped into the baths. Archaeological sites across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East continue to reveal how widespread this tradition became. From the deserts of Syria to the cooler landscapes of Britain, bathhouses appeared wherever Roman administration established strong urban centers. Each complex adapted slightly to its environment, but the core experience remained consistent. Today, the ruins of these bathhouses still carry traces of that shared routine. Stone pillars once supporting heated floors remain in place beneath open skies. Pools that once held clear water now stand empty, their edges worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Corridors that once guided thousands of visitors each day now sit silent, visited only by historians and travelers. Yet if we pause and look carefully at these spaces, it is still possible to imagine the life that once filled them. We can picture the steady warmth rising through the floors, the sound of water echoing through the halls, and the conversations of people who gathered here every afternoon. Through those ordinary moments, the Roman bathhouse became far more than a place to wash. It became a symbol of how the Roman world organized daily life, through shared spaces, careful engineering, and routines that connected individuals to their wider community. And in that sense, understanding how Romans took baths reveals something enduring about their civilization. It shows how even the most familiar habits, warming the body, cleaning the skin, and speaking with neighbors, could be shaped into a system that reflected the order, ambition, and social life of an entire empire. If we imagine the Roman bathhouse not as a ruin but as a living space once again, the final picture becomes much clearer. These buildings were never meant to stand empty or silent. They were designed for movement, warmth, and human presence. Every corridor, every chamber, and every pool existed to guide the body through a carefully planned sequence of experience. The architecture itself quietly directed how people behaved inside the space. A visitor entering the baths did not need written instructions. The layout made the process almost intuitive. First came the changing room, where clothing was left behind and the day's dust began to fade from thought. Then came the exercise yard or the warm tepidarium, where the body adjusted slowly to rising temperatures. Beyond that lay the caldarium, the hottest room, where steam and heat encouraged perspiration. Finally, the frigidarium waited with its cold pool, offering a sharp and refreshing conclusion to the entire routine. This sequence was not accidental. Roman engineers and architects understood that comfort came from gradual transition. Moving slowly from warm to hot and then suddenly into cold water created a sense of physical renewal that many Romans valued deeply. Even today, similar patterns appear in modern spas and thermal bath traditions around the world. But the Roman baths were never only about physical comfort. They were also environments shaped for community life. The open halls and wide pools allowed people to see and speak with one another easily. Conversations formed naturally because the design of the building encouraged people to pause, sit, and observe the activity around them. For merchants, the baths could become informal meeting places where business relationships strengthened over time. For local officials, they offered opportunities to hear the concerns or opinions of fellow citizens in a relaxed setting. For ordinary residents, they provided a chance to see friends, exchange news, and take part in the social rhythm of the city. Because of this constant interaction, bathhouses helped build a shared sense of urban identity. People who might otherwise live in separate neighborhoods or follow different occupations still encountered one another within the same public space. Over months and years, these repeated encounters created familiarity. Faces became recognizable, routines became predictable, and the bathhouse became one of the most socially connected locations in the entire city. Another important aspect of Roman bathing culture was the way it blended practicality with beauty. The Romans rarely built public structures that were purely functional. Even buildings designed for everyday use often included decorative elements that elevated the experience. In bathhouses, this meant mosaics on the floors, painted walls, marble panels, and statues placed in niches along the halls. These artistic details served a subtle purpose. They reminded visitors that the bathhouse was not simply a utility, but a civic space worthy of care and pride. Just as temples expressed religious devotion and theaters expressed cultural life, baths expressed the Roman appreciation for order, cleanliness, and shared public comfort. When modern historians study these structures, they often see them as symbols of Rome's broader approach to urban living. Roman cities were built around the idea that infrastructure should serve the population collectively. Aqueducts delivered water to fountains and baths. Roads connected neighborhoods and markets. Public buildings offered spaces where citizens could gather. The bathhouse fit perfectly into this vision. It combined engineering skill, architectural planning, and social interaction within one environment. Few other institutions of the ancient world managed to blend these elements so successfully. Even long after the Roman Empire faded, the memory of these baths continued to influence later cultures. In various parts of Europe and the Mediterranean, communal bathing traditions evolved from similar principles. Heated rooms, steam chambers, and sequences of warm and cold immersion remained part of bathing culture for centuries. Today, the ruins of Roman baths still stand as reminders of this remarkable system. In cities like Pompeii, Ostia, and Bath in England, visitors can walk through the same rooms where Romans once gathered daily. The pools are empty and the ceilings are often gone, but the structure remains clear enough to imagine the original experience. Standing in those ruins, it becomes easy to understand why the bathhouse held such an important place in Roman life. It was not simply about washing the body. It was about participating in a shared daily ritual that connected individuals to their city, their neighbors, and the larger world of Roman civilization. And through that simple routine, warm rooms, flowing water, the scrape of a strigil, and the refreshing plunge into cold water, the Romans created one of the most enduring and recognizable traditions of the ancient world. Over long stretches of time, the Roman bathhouse became something more than just a building filled with pools and heated floors. It became a quiet symbol of what Roman urban life was supposed to feel like. When people spoke about the comforts of the city, the baths were often part of that image. Alongside paved streets, flowing fountains, and busy marketplaces, the bathhouse represented a place where order, cleanliness, and community came together. For many citizens, the daily visit to the baths created a reassuring rhythm. Morning hours were often devoted to work, business, or household duties. The afternoon offered a pause, a moment when people stepped away from responsibilities and entered a shared environment built for rest and renewal. Over time, this pattern shaped how Romans understood the balance between labor and leisure. This balance was not merely about relaxation. Roman thinkers often believed that a healthy citizen should care for both body and mind. Physical exercise in the palestra, followed by bathing, was seen as a way to maintain strength and well-being. At the same time, the conversations that took place within the baths allowed ideas, opinions, and news to circulate through the community. In this sense, bathing became part of civic life rather than something separate from it. Even the youngest members of Roman society grew up learning this routine. Fathers sometimes brought their sons to the baths, showing them how to move through the sequence of rooms and how to use the strigil after oiling the skin. Through these repeated visits, younger generations absorbed the customs that had already shaped Roman life for centuries. By the time they reached adulthood, the bathing process felt completely natural. Women also participated in bathing culture, although the arrangements varied depending on the city and the period. Some bathhouses included separate sections for women, while others scheduled different hours for male and female visitors. Archaeological remains in several cities show spaces designed specifically for female bathers, indicating that communal bathing was not limited to one part of society. Over the centuries, bathhouses expanded and evolved as cities grew. New wings were added, pools were rebuilt, and heating systems were improved. Emperors sometimes funded enormous bath complexes that could accommodate thousands of visitors at once. These projects were expensive, but they carried political value. By providing impressive public baths, rulers demonstrated generosity and reinforced the idea that the Roman state could provide comfort and stability to its people. At the same time, smaller neighborhood bathhouses continued operating alongside these grand imperial complexes. Not every citizen visited the largest baths every day. Many preferred the familiarity of a local establishment close to home. These smaller bathhouses created tight-knit communities where the same visitors returned again and again, strengthening personal connections. Archaeologists have uncovered countless examples of these buildings throughout the territories once governed by Rome. In Britain, the remains of bathhouses stand beside former military forts and civilian towns. In North Africa, bath complexes appear within cities that once thrived along desert trade routes. In the eastern Mediterranean, ruins of baths still rise among ancient marketplaces and temples. Each of these discoveries reinforces the same conclusion. Bathing was one of the most widespread and consistent habits of Roman urban culture. No matter how distant a city was from Rome itself, the presence of a bathhouse signaled participation in a shared way of life. Today, when we look at the remains of these structures, it is easy to focus on their impressive engineering. The hypocaust heating systems, the vaulted ceilings, and the carefully designed water channels all reveal remarkable technical skill. Yet the deeper story of the Roman bathhouse lies in the human routines that once filled those spaces. Inside those walls, people laughed, debated, rested, and prepared themselves for the next day. The warmth of the floors and the cool shock of the frigidarium were experienced by countless individuals whose names history has long forgotten. And that may be the most powerful legacy of the Roman bathhouse. It reminds us that the life of an empire was not built only on great events or famous leaders. It was also built on ordinary moments repeated by millions of people. Moments of warmth, conversation, and simple daily care shared within the quiet architecture of the Roman world. As we continue to look at the Roman bathhouse from a wider perspective, it becomes clear that these buildings were among the most complete expressions of Roman urban planning. They brought together multiple systems that the Romans had perfected over centuries: water engineering, heating technology, architectural symmetry, and public accessibility. Few other structures combined so many aspects of Roman knowledge in one place. The success of the bathhouse relied heavily on Rome's mastery of water management. Aqueducts carried enormous volumes of fresh water from distant hills and springs into cities. These stone channels often stretched for many miles, crossing valleys on high arches and descending gradually toward their destination. Once the water reached the city, it was distributed through a network of pipes that fed fountains, homes, and bath complexes. Without this reliable supply, the Roman bathing culture could never have expanded so widely. Inside the baths, the water followed a carefully controlled path. Pools were filled continuously so that used water could flow away through drains. This prevented stagnation and helped keep the baths relatively clean. Some complexes included separate pools for different temperatures, allowing visitors to move gradually from warm immersion to colder water without needing to heat or cool the same basin repeatedly. Equally impressive was the heating system hidden beneath the floors. The hypocaust worked by raising the floor on small pillars of brick or stone, creating an empty space below the surface. Hot air from the furnace traveled through this cavity, warming the floor above and often passing upward through hollow channels in the walls. This design allowed the caldarium and tepidarium to maintain steady temperatures even when large numbers of visitors were present. Maintaining this system required constant attention. Workers monitored the fires, adjusted the airflow, and ensured that ash did not block the circulation of heat. Fuel had to arrive regularly, which meant that forests and supply routes outside the city were part of the bathhouse's daily operation. Although visitors experienced only warmth and comfort, an entire chain of labor supported that experience behind the scenes. Another fascinating feature of Roman bathhouses was their attention to light and space. Architects often placed large windows in the hottest rooms so that sunlight could contribute additional warmth. These windows were usually positioned to face the afternoon sun, maximizing natural heat during the busiest bathing hours. The combination of sunlight and heated floors created an environment that felt bright and welcoming rather than dark or smoky. Decoration played an important role as well. Floors were often covered in intricate mosaics, many of which depicted marine life, dolphins, fish, and mythological figures connected with water. Walls were painted with vibrant colors or lined with polished marble panels. Sculptures of gods or heroes sometimes stood in niches along the halls, reminding visitors that bathing was connected to ideas of health, harmony, and civilized living. Even the sounds within the bathhouse contributed to its atmosphere. The splash of water, the murmur of conversation, and the occasional laughter from the exercise courtyard echoed through the vaulted ceilings. Roman writers occasionally described these sounds, sometimes with amusement and sometimes with irritation, depending on their personal taste. For some, the baths were lively and social. For others, they were noisy and crowded. But almost everyone acknowledged their importance in daily life. In many ways, the bathhouse acted as a mirror of Roman society itself. It demonstrated technological confidence through its engineering, social complexity through its crowds, and cultural pride through its decoration. It was a place where ordinary citizens experienced the benefits of Roman organization firsthand. What makes the Roman bathhouse especially remarkable is that this experience was not limited to the capital city. From Spain to Syria, from North Africa to Britain, bathhouses appeared wherever Roman influence established stable urban communities. Each region adapted the design slightly to its climate and materials, yet the core structure remained recognizable. Today, historians studying these ruins often describe them as some of the most informative archaeological sites of the ancient world. Because baths were used daily by so many people, they accumulated objects and structural changes that reveal how cities evolved over time. Layers of repair work, new decorations, and modified heating systems all show how communities continued investing in these buildings for generations. Through these remains, we gain a deeper understanding of how Romans lived, not just how they ruled or fought wars, but how they structured ordinary life. The bathhouse, with its warmth, water, and conversation, became one of the most enduring expressions of Roman civilization. And in that quiet routine, repeated day after day across the empire, the Romans demonstrated something lasting. That even the simplest human needs, cleanliness, comfort, and social connection, could be shaped by thoughtful design into a shared cultural tradition that endured for centuries. As centuries passed, the Roman bathhouse continued to evolve alongside the cities that surrounded it. In some places, bath complexes grew larger and more elaborate, reflecting the wealth and ambitions of local communities. In others, smaller neighborhood baths remained the center of daily routines, serving residents who preferred a familiar and nearby gathering place. Regardless of size, the essential purpose of the bathhouse remained the same: to create a shared environment where the body could be refreshed and social life could unfold naturally. One of the most striking things about Roman baths is how adaptable their design proved to be. Architects could adjust the layout depending on the available space, the climate, and the resources of a particular city. In warmer parts of the empire, such as North Africa or southern Italy, bathhouses often included large open courtyards and swimming pools where sunlight and fresh air played a greater role in the experience. In colder regions like northern Gaul or Britain, the heated rooms became even more important, and additional insulation helped maintain warmth during long winters. This flexibility helped ensure that Roman bathing culture spread widely across the empire. Even in distant frontier towns, where the population might consist largely of soldiers and traders, bathhouses appeared as soon as the settlement grew large enough to support them. Their presence offered a sense of familiarity to people who had traveled far from their homes. A soldier stationed on the edge of the empire could step into a bathhouse and experience the same sequence of warmth and water that citizens enjoyed in the heart of Rome. These shared experiences quietly reinforced the idea of belonging to a larger Roman world. The empire was vast, containing many different languages, traditions, and landscapes. Yet the bathhouse created a common routine that transcended those differences. A visitor from Spain could enter a bathhouse in Asia Minor and understand immediately how the building functioned. The same rooms, the same heating systems, and the same bathing customs appeared again and again across thousands of miles. At the heart of this system was Roman engineering. The ability to transport water over long distances and heat large interior spaces allowed bathhouses to operate on a scale rarely seen in earlier civilizations. Aqueducts delivered fresh water continuously, ensuring that pools remained clean and full. Furnaces beneath the floors produced steady warmth that could be controlled by adjusting the flow of hot air through the hypocaust system. These technologies worked together to create an environment where bathing could take place comfortably in every season. Yet even with such impressive engineering, the bathhouse remained deeply connected to the rhythms of everyday life. Visitors arrived with the same expectations each day. They exercised, warmed themselves, cleaned their skin with oil and strigils, cooled down in the frigidarium, and spent time talking with others before leaving. The repetition of this process gave structure to the afternoon hours and provided a predictable moment of rest within busy urban schedules. Roman writers sometimes reflected on the social atmosphere of the baths with a mixture of admiration and humor. Some described the lively noise of crowded rooms, where voices echoed beneath high ceilings and the splash of water mixed with laughter and conversation. Others commented on the diversity of people who gathered there. Athletes practicing their exercises, merchants discussing trade, philosophers sharing ideas, and ordinary citizens simply enjoying a break from work. All of these activities coexisted within the same architectural framework. The bathhouse did not force a single type of behavior, but allowed many forms of social interaction to unfold at once. A visitor could spend an afternoon quietly relaxing in warm water, or they could participate actively in conversation and exercise. The building provided the structure, but the people inside gave it life. When we walk through the ruins of Roman baths today, it is easy to focus on their impressive size and engineering. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of these structures lies in the human stories they contain. Every worn stone step, every polished edge of a pool, and every repaired section of floor tells us that countless individuals once moved through these spaces as part of their daily routine. They arrived carrying the dust of the streets, the fatigue of work, and the concerns of the day. They left refreshed, having shared time with their community in an environment designed for comfort and balance. Through this simple yet carefully organized process, the Roman bathhouse became one of the most recognizable and enduring institutions of the ancient world. And even now, long after the fires beneath the floors have gone cold and the aqueducts have fallen silent, the outline of that experience still remains visible in stone. It reminds us that beneath the grand history of the Roman Empire was a quieter story, one told through the ordinary moments of daily life, repeated again and again in the warm, echoing halls of the Roman baths. As we reach the end of the story, the Roman bathhouse begins to feel less like a distant historical curiosity and more like a window into the quiet routines that shaped everyday life in the ancient world. Behind the marble walls and heated floors was a system that worked day after day, supporting millions of small moments that rarely appear in history books. For the Romans, bathing was never just about washing the body. It was about stepping into a shared space where the pressures of the day could ease for a while. Within the warm chambers of the tepidarium, the intense heat of the caldarium, and the refreshing plunge of the frigidarium, people followed a rhythm that had become deeply familiar across the empire. In those rooms, conversations unfolded naturally. Friends met, neighbors exchanged news, and travelers carried stories from distant provinces. The bathhouse became one of the few places where different layers of society could appear side by side, participating in the same routine even if their lives outside those walls were very different. All of this depended on an extraordinary network working quietly behind the scenes. Aqueducts carried water across valleys and hills. Workers maintained furnaces beneath the floors. Architects designed spaces that balanced warmth, light, and movement. What appeared effortless to visitors was actually the result of careful planning and constant labor. Yet the Romans themselves probably thought little about that complexity as they moved through their daily routine. For them, the bathhouse was simply part of the city, a place as familiar as the market or the streets outside their homes. Today, the pools are empty and the fires beneath the floors have long since faded. But the ruins that remain still tell the story. The outlines of warm rooms, cold basins, and exercise courtyards allow us to imagine the rhythm that once filled these spaces with life. Through those ruins, we glimpse a quieter side of Roman civilization. Not the march of armies or the speeches of emperors, but the ordinary habit repeated across generations. An afternoon visit to the baths, where warmth, water, and conversation brought a vast empire briefly together in the shared routine of daily life.